Krell's breath caught in his throat. One of the Shurla machines, larger than the rest, was making its way toward the wreckage. It was a towering behemoth, its form twice the size of the others, its armor a deep dark silver. Its eyes glowed a menacing red as it moved with calculated purpose. "This one's different," Krell muttered under his breath, instinctively stepping back as it approached. Sorvak had noticed it too. He barked orders to his troops. "Fall back. Keep your distance from that one. It's not like the others. We'll need more firepower." The soldiers scrambled to comply, but the behemoth's movements were unnervingly quick for its size. It crushed to brace beneath its massive feet, its weapons charged and ready to fire. The air hummed with the intensity of its power. Krell's mind raced. This was a different kind of enemy, more sophisticated, more deadly. There was no denying it now. This was the true face of the Shurla threat. Sorvak didn't hesitate. He motioned for Krell and a few of the other soldiers to follow him. "We need to get to the central core of the Dauntless. There's a weapon there, an EMP cannon. It could disable that behemoth long enough for us to finish the fight." Krell nodded grimly, rallying his team as they moved toward the heart of the ship. The behemoth followed, its large, glowing eyes tracking their every move. Krell knew they had little time. If they didn't act fast, the Dauntless, their last hope, would fall, just like all the other wreckage surrounding them. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. Krell glanced over his shoulder. The behemoth was closing in. "We need to move faster," Krell shouted, his voice strained. As they reached the central core of the ship, Sorvak worked quickly, accessing the ship's systems and rerouting power to the EMP cannon. The behemoth's footfalls were deafening now, the ground shaking beneath them as it neared. Krell could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his every instinct screaming at him to fight, to take action. But they needed to do this carefully. One misstep, and they would be wiped out before they could even launch the attack. Sorvak's fingers flew over the interface, his expression a mask of concentration. "It's almost ready," he muttered. "Get into position." Krell nodded and motioned for the others to spread out, taking their positions around the core. The behemoth was mere moments away from breaking through the last line of defense. It was now or never. Suddenly, the air was filled with the deafening roar of the behemoth as it charged toward them, its massive form a blur of deadly intent. Krell's breath caught in his throat, but he didn't move. He held his position, his eyes locked on the target. "Now, General," Krell shouted. Sorvak slammed his fist onto the final command button, and the EMP cannon roared to life. A pulse of energy shot out from the Dauntless, crackling through the air, and slammed directly into the behemoth. The Shurla staggered, its limbs twitching as the EMP blast overloaded its systems. The machine screeched in frustration, its red eyes flickering erratically. For a moment, it stood frozen, its powerful form shaking with the strain. Then, with a deafening crash, the behemoth collapsed to the ground, its massive body hitting the wreckage with a resounding thud. The ground trembled beneath them, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Sorvak turned to Krell, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. "Well done. Now, let's finish this." The soldiers, now with renewed hope, began to push forward once more. The remaining Shurla, seeing their leader fall, hesitated, their calculated precision faltering for the first time. It was the opening the Retheri needed. The battlefield had transformed. What had once been a place of chaos and destruction was now eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the Dauntless's systems and the distant echoes of the remaining Shurla machines. The EMP blast had been their turning point, disabling the behemoth and giving the Retheri soldiers the chance they needed to break the enemy's advance. But Krell knew the war wasn't over yet. The Shurla were relentless. They didn't retreat, not unless they were destroyed completely. He stood alongside Sorvak and the other soldiers, watching as the remaining machines regrouped, their glowing eyes scanning the wreckage, searching for survivors. "We have to finish this now," Sorvak said, his voice low but resolute. "If we leave even one of them alive, they'll regroup and come back stronger. We can't afford that." Krell nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. He had seen what the Shurula were capable of. He had witnessed their cold, calculating nature and their relentless pursuit of victory. If they let even one escape, it would haunt them. He couldn't allow that. "General, what's the plan?" Krell asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Sorvak's eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. "We make our stand here. We use the Dauntless as our final stronghold. They'll come to us, and we'll take them down, one by one. We've learned their tactics. We've seen their weaknesses. Now we exploit them." Krell felt a surge of adrenaline. They were so close to victory, so close to avenging the fallen crew of the Dauntless. This was no longer just about survival. It was about ensuring that the sacrifice of the humans who had fought here would not be in vain. Sorvak gave a signal, and the Retheri soldiers moved into position. They had set up turrets around the perimeter, energy shields activated, and their weapons primed. The Dauntless was battered, its systems barely functioning, but it was still standing. It was their last defense, and they would not let it fall. The first of the Shurula appeared on the horizon, their towering forms silhouetted against the backdrop of distant stars. They had regrouped, and they were charging, their movements synchronized and relentless. Krell could hear the low hum of their weapons powering up, their intent clear. They were coming to destroy everything in their path. "Brace yourselves," Sorvak shouted. "Fire at will." The air erupted into a symphony of energy blasts as the Retheri soldiers unleashed everything they had. The turrets fired, their rapid shots hitting the advancing Shurula head-on. The ground shook as explosions rocked the battlefield, but still, the machines pressed forward, their armor withstanding the blows. Krell fired, his aim true as he targeted the joint of a Shurula's leg, just as Sorvak had taught them. The machine staggered, but it didn't go down. More of the Shurula closed in, their numbers overwhelming. "Keep firing," Sorvak ordered, his voice unwavering. Krell continued to fire, his shots finding weak points in the Shurula's armor. But even with their new tactics and firepower, the machines were proving to be far more resilient than he had anticipated. He could see it now, the sheer scale of the threat they were facing. The quiet hum of the space station was soon replaced by the alerting sound of the communication console beeping steadily. It was a signal, not the usual transmission from Allied fleets or mundane ship-to-ship chatter, but something ancient, something coded in a human encryption style. Sorvak, sitting at the command station in the heart of the base, frowned as the message played out on the screen. The static-filled voice, though faint, was unmistakable. "Distress. Coordinates. Sigma 6. We are requesting immediate evacuation. Urgent." The message cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in the room. The console flashed with coordinates, pinpointing a remote sector far from any known Retheri-controlled space. A sector long thought to be abandoned after a violent skirmish with the Shurula, a race of ruthless invaders. It was a place no one had bothered to chart in years. Krell leaned over Sorvak's shoulder, his youthful impatience clear. "It's probably just a relic of the past. Some old human distress signal playing on a loop. Why waste our time?" Sorvak turned to Krell, his eyes sharp and cold. "Do not underestimate the past. It often speaks louder than we realize." There was a weight in his words, a hint of something more, but Krell wasn't paying attention. He only saw the assignment as a waste of precious time. Still, he wasn't about to question his superior directly. Sorvak stood, his movements deliberate. "Prepare your gear, Krell. We leave at first light." The rest of the soldiers were notified, and soon the station's hangar buzzed with activity. The crew prepared for a mission that, to most, seemed like nothing more than a reconnaissance. Yet to Sorvak, it felt different. He'd seen this before, an old signal, one that had once been used to communicate across light years, meant to reach anyone within range. And yet, it was a signal that hadn't been heard in centuries. As the soldiers gathered in the docking bay, Krell's skepticism remained evident. He couldn't fathom why their commander was so insistent on investigating this. He had been with the Retheri army for long enough to know that human legends, no matter how bold or brave, were just that, legends. He figured the message was likely from a long-lost ship that had been doomed for ages. There was no glory in investigating the forgotten. The Retheri warships powered up, their sleek, powerful hulls gleaming under the station's artificial lighting. Sorvak stood at the helm of the lead ship, his expression calm but unreadable. Krell stood beside him, still unable to shake his disbelief. "General," Krell said, voice tripping with mockery, "don't tell me we're really going to chase down some ghost from the past. You don't believe in human fairy tales, do you?" Sorvak's gaze remained fixed on the stars beyond the ship's window. "Humanity is a force to be reckoned with, Krell. Never forget that." Krell laughed. "I'll believe it when I see it." The ship's engines hummed to life, and soon they were streaking through hyperspace, leaving the familiar Retheri sectors behind. The coordinates on the screen grew closer and closer, and the eerie sense of unease began to gnaw at the back of Krell's mind. Though he wouldn't admit it, something about the mission had shifted. There was more at stake here than a simple distress signal. As they approached the coordinates, the region before them was eerily quiet. Empty, save for scattered debris and broken satellites, the remnants of a long-forgotten conflict. The team descended toward a large asteroid field, where a derelict human ship lay in the midst of the chaos. Its hull was riddled with signs of battle, blasted open sections, scorch marks, and burned scars from what could only have been a brutal confrontation. Krell's curiosity piqued despite himself. There was no denying the sheer magnitude of the devastation before them. It wasn't a legend. It was real. Sorvak's voice came through the comms, low and steady. "Prepare to board. The answers we seek are within." Krell felt a strange shift in the air. The further they ventured into this unknown sector, the more certain he became that this wasn't just another ghost of human history. Something deeper, more profound, awaited them here. As the team landed and began to disembark, the once skeptical Krell had a sinking feeling in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this mission would uncover something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about humanity. For the first time, Krell felt something stir inside him. Respect, not just for the humans, but for their sacrifice. He had mocked their legends, but now, staring at the plaque, he realized that some stories were more than just words. They were the truth, and this truth was about to change everything. The silence in the wreckage was profound, the kind that only comes when everything worth saying has already been spoken. As Krell stood before the memorial of Captain Dale Rourke, a strange weight pressed on his chest. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the worn metal plaque bearing the name of a hero he had only just learned about. For a moment, he could almost hear the captain's voice, calm and resolute, as if it were still echoing through time. "Hold the line. Give them the time they need." Krell took a step back, shaken by the weight of those words. How many soldiers, how many people had been inspired by the strength of those who fought in the face of certain death? How many had made similar sacrifices? These were not the actions of a weak species, a primitive race that Krell had once ridiculed. These were the actions of warriors. Behind him, Sorvak moved purposefully through the wreckage, his movements deliberate. He didn't speak, but Krell could sense the emotion behind his stoic exterior. The general wasn't simply a commander issuing orders and leading from the front. He was someone who had lived this story, someone who had witnessed the same sacrifice and courage the humans had shown. "I fought alongside humans." Sorvak's voice came suddenly, breaking through Krell's thoughts. The general spoke softly, but his words carried the weight of experience. "On a battlefield much like this one, we were cornered, trapped by a relentless enemy. They, humans, held the line when the odds were impossible. They fought not for themselves, but for their people. Krell's eyes widened. This was something he hadn't expected to hear. "You fought alongside them?" he asked, his voice almost disbelieving. Sorvak nodded, his gaze shifting to the stars beyond the wreckage. "Yes. It was a war that many have forgotten. A war that shaped me in ways I cannot forget. I owe my life to those humans, to their courage, their refusal to back down." Krell stood still, taking in the weight of the general's words. He had heard rumors, of course, that Sorvak had been part of a campaign alongside humans, but this was different. This wasn't a rumor. This was the truth. The general's voice was quiet but firm. "They taught me what it means to truly fight, to fight with everything, even when death is certain. To fight because others are depending on you. To fight because it's the right thing to do." Krell didn't know how to respond. His mind swirled with conflicting thoughts. Everything he had been taught about the superiority of the Retheri, about their strength and invincibility, was beginning to feel hollow. These humans, these beings he had once considered beneath him, had done something his own people might not have been capable of. "What happened to them?" Krell asked, his voice softer than before. "To the crew of the Dauntless." Sorvak's expression softened, and for the first time, the hardness in his eyes gave way to something more vulnerable. "They died. Not because they were weak, but because they chose to give everything for others. For their people. The captain, Rourke, he died holding off the enemy long enough for us to escape. I would not be here if not for him. None of us would." Krell swallowed, his heart heavy with the weight of the story. The thought of such sacrifice, of warriors so willing to lay down their lives for others, was beyond what he had ever imagined. He looked around at the wreckage, at the memorial of the dauntless crew, and for the first time, he understood. This was not a place of failure. This was a place of heroism. As the team continued to search the wreckage, Krell found himself moving with a new sense of purpose. The mockery of the past, the jokes about human legends, seemed foolish now. He had seen the truth with his own eyes. He had seen the courage, the honor, the will to fight, not for glory, but for something greater than oneself. And in that moment, he felt something stir within him, a respect for the humans he had once dismissed. Krell turned to Sorvak, his voice firm but respectful. "General, what do we do now?" Sorvak looked at him, his expression unreadable for a moment before a faint, approving nod passed between them. "We honor their memory. We find out what happened here. And we make sure that no one forgets the sacrifice they made." Krell nodded, his mind now focused on the mission ahead. The Dauntless had fought, had died, but they had not done so in vain. Their legacy would not be forgotten. The ship's data core was the next objective. It might hold the answers they needed, answers that would shed light on why the Dauntless had been left to burn in this forgotten corner of space. But Krell knew one thing for sure. Whatever secrets it contained, they would not change the fact that humans, fragile, vulnerable, and small, had done something extraordinary. And that, he realized, was worth more than any technology or weapon. The silence of the battlefield was unsettling. The Retheri soldiers continued their careful examination of the wreckage, but the sense of foreboding was growing thicker by the minute. The battle they had just uncovered was not a relic of ancient history. It felt as if it were still ongoing, the echoes of violence lingering in the void. Krell couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The debris around them seemed to shift in the dim light, as if the very remnants of the battle were alive, waiting for something. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he adjusted his rifle, his eyes scanning the shadows that stretched across the wrecked landscape. Sorvak, however, was not fooled by the eerie quiet. His senses, honed by years of warfare, were attuned to the smallest of details. He turned to his crew, his voice low but commanding. "Stay alert. This place is not as abandoned as it seems." At first, the soldiers didn't understand. The wreckage was still. Nothing moved. But then, a faint signal appeared on the communication screen, cutting through the static. Sorvak stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he analyzed the data. It was brief, just a flash of encrypted information. "It's them," Sorvak muttered, his voice almost a whisper, though it carried the weight of years of experience. "The Shurala. They've returned." Krell's heart skipped a beat. The Shurala were a race of ruthless, nearly unstoppable machines, beings that had once ravaged whole planets, leaving nothing in their wake but ruin and ashes. The Retheri had barely survived their last encounter with them, and the thought of facing them again sent a chill through Krell's bones. "What do you mean, General?" Krell asked, his voice trembling. "How are they here?" "This is a dead zone. We've been out of range for years." Sorvak's expression hardened. "We thought they were defeated, but they've been lying in wait. This sector was once their stronghold. When the humans fought them, they didn't just defend. They sealed them away. The signal you found, it wasn't a call for help. It was a trap." As Sorvak spoke, the quiet stillness of the asteroid field was shattered by a sudden, sharp noise, like the sound of metal scraping against stone. The soldiers spun around, weapons raised, but saw nothing. The hairs on the back of Krell's neck stood on end. He could feel it now, a shift in the atmosphere. Something was moving in the shadows, hidden just beyond their sight. And then, without warning, they came. The Shurala appeared in a burst of motion, their massive forms cloaked in the debris of the wreckage. They were machines, yes, but not in the way Krell had imagined. Their metal frames were sleek, sharp, and unnervingly organic, as if they were more alive than artificial. The Shurala had a single goal: extermination. The soldiers scrambled into position, their minds racing to process the threat that had appeared out of nowhere. Sorvak's voice rang out, a steady command to his troops. "Hold your ground. We fight together." Krell's breath caught in his throat as the first of the Shurala descended upon them, its massive form blocking out the stars. It moved with terrifying speed, its weaponized limbs tearing through the air with deadly precision. The soldiers opened fire, but their weapons seemed almost useless against the impenetrable armor of the machines. The Shurala's metallic hide absorbed the shots with ease, and they advanced relentlessly. Sorvak led the charge, his weapon flashing as he struck at the machines with calculated ferocity. Krell followed, his pulse quickening. The battle was unlike anything he had ever encountered. There was no glory here, no honor in battle. It was pure survival. "Get to the ship," Sorvak barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to find shelter and regroup. The Dauntless is our only chance." But as they retreated toward the wreckage of the human ship, the Shurala were not far behind. Their movements were swift, almost predatory, and their numbers seemed endless. It was as if they had always been waiting for this moment, their presence a haunting shadow over the battlefield. Krell's heart raced as he sprinted toward the ship. He could hear the sound of metal grinding against metal as the Shurala closed in. He glanced back, his eyes wide with fear. For the first time since he had joined the Retheri forces, Krell realized just how powerless they were against this enemy. The Shurala were more than just machines. They were predators, designed with one sole purpose: to hunt, to kill, and to conquer. As they reached the wreckage of the Dauntless, Sorvak's voice came through the comms, firm and unwavering. "Hold the line. We will not fall here." Krell gritted his teeth, his weapon raised, and took position beside the general. This was a battle they could not afford to lose. The fate of not only the Retheri, but also the legacy of the humans who had fought here so long ago, depended on their ability to survive. In the distance, the Shurala advanced, their glowing eyes fixed on their prey. This would be a fight for their very lives. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Krell's pulse raced in his ears as he took position next to General Sorvak, his weapon steady in his hands. The Retheri soldiers had fortified the remains of the Dauntless, but even they knew it was a temporary solution. The Shurala were relentless. Their massive forms moved with a terrifying precision, their cold, mechanical eyes fixed on their prey. Sorvak's voice was steady, but there was a fire in his eyes. "Hold the line. This ship is our last defense. Do not let them get any closer." Krell nodded, his hand shaking slightly, but his grip on the weapon remained firm. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This was no ordinary battle. This wasn't just about survival. It was about honor, legacy, and the truth behind the Dauntless and its crew. The humans had fought here, and now, the Shurula were here to finish what they had started. The first Shurula soldiers reached the perimeter of the wreckage, their massive frames towering over the smaller Retheri soldiers. They were a blur of motion, their mechanical limbs moving with deadly speed as they closed in on the defenses. The Retheri opened fire, but the Shurula's armor seemed impervious to their weapons, each shot bouncing off with a dull thud. "We need something more," Krell muttered under his breath, watching as his shots ricocheted off the enemy. "These weapons aren't enough." Sorvak didn't look at him, but his voice carried an edge of certainty. "We need to use their tactics against them." As the last of the Shurula approached, Krell's thoughts turned to the crew of the Dauntless. Their bravery had inspired him in ways he hadn't imagined. They had fought and died with honor. And now, it was up to the Retheri to carry that torch forward. They couldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. In the midst of the chaos, Sorvak's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "We're not finished yet. We have one final move." He turned to Krell, his eyes burning with determination. "Krell, take the shot. The core of the Dauntless is vulnerable. Aim for the power core. We'll end this." Krell didn't hesitate. His heart pounded in his chest as he adjusted his weapon, taking aim at the exposed power core of the Dauntless. The Shurula were closing in, but this was their only chance to end the fight once and for all. With a deep breath, Krell fired. The shot struck the core with a blinding flash, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. The Dauntless's power core exploded in a brilliant eruption of energy, engulfing the remaining Shurula in a wave of devastating force. The shockwave knocked Krell off his feet, but he held on, his vision blurry but focused. When the dust settled, the battlefield was silent once again. The Shurula were gone. The last of them had been obliterated in the explosion. Krell lay there for a moment, catching his breath. The reality of the victory was slow to sink in. They had done it. They had not only survived but triumphed. And the legacy of the humans, who had fought and died on this very ground, had been honored. Sorvak stood over him, offering a hand to help him up. His expression was grim, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. "We've won, Krell. And we did it together." Krell nodded, his heart heavy with the memory of the fallen. This battle may be over, but their story is far from forgotten. The Dauntless and her crew, what they did here will live on. Their sacrifice won't fade. Sorvak's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the stars twinkled silently in the distance. "It won't fade," he agreed. "It never will." Krell's heart still raced, but a new sense of purpose filled him. He had seen the power of the human legacy firsthand. Their ingenuity, their courage, and their willingness to sacrifice everything. Now, he would honor that legacy, not just for himself, but for everyone who had fallen. "We're not done yet," Krell said under his breath, his voice determined. "Let's end this." Krell didn't fully understand what the general meant, but before he could ask, Sorvak was already moving. The general sprinted toward the wreckage of an old human fighter ship nearby. It had been abandoned for years, but its systems were still active, barely functioning. Sorvak reached it and began to hack into the console, his fingers flying across the keys. Krell followed, his mind racing. "What are you doing, General?" "We have to turn their own technology against them," Sorvak replied, his voice low but determined. "The humans knew how to fight these machines. They had to. And now, it's time we learn from them." Krell's eyes widened. He had heard rumors of human ingenuity, how they had once used tactics and strategies that were considered unthinkable by other species. And here, In the midst of this chaotic battle, it seemed like Sorvak was about to reveal the truth of those rumors. The console in front of Sorvak come to life. A flickering holographic map appeared, showing the Shurla positions and a series of hidden weak spots in their armor, identified long ago by the humans. Sorvak's fingers danced across the interface, rerouting power to the nearby turrets that had once been used for the ship's defense. "We can use these," Sorvak said, a note of urgency in his voice. "Aim for the joints. The weak points are there, if we can hit them right." Before he could finish, a loud roar echoed through the field. One of the Shurla had reached the perimeter, its massive limbs swinging with lethal intent. Krell barely had time to react, his weapon raised in a desperate attempt to stop the machine. But Sorvak was faster. The general had already activated the ship's defense systems, and with a deafening blast, a series of energy cannons fired, striking the Shurla in the chest. The blast sent the Shurla crashing back, its massive form slamming into the wreckage of another ship. It was down, but only temporarily. The machines were resilient, and they didn't stay down for long. Krell's heart raced. That was one. There are still more. "We have to work quickly," Sorvak said, his voice strained but calm. "We use everything we can. Don't hold back." Krell nodded, his mind now focused. He could see the Shurla advancing, more of them moving into position. The Rethari soldiers began to fire, aiming for the weak spots Sorvak had identified. The energy cannons fired again, and another Shurla fell. But still, more came. Despite the overwhelming odds, Krell felt a strange sense of unity among his team. They were fighting together for the same cause. The humans had done this too. They had fought against impossible odds and never backed down. And now, as Krell took aim at another Shurla, he understood what it meant to fight not for himself, but for those who stood beside him. The fight raged on. The air was filled with the crackle of energy blasts, the roar of Shurla soldiers, and the determined shouts of the Rethari. With every shot fired, Krell could feel the resolve of his people strengthen. This was more than a battle for survival. This was a battle to honor those who had fought before them, the humans who had stood their ground when all hope seemed lost. Sorvak's voice cut through the chaos, strong and unwavering. "We are not alone. The legacy of the humans lives in us, and we will win this." Krell looked back at the wreckage of the Dauntless, the ship that had borne the souls of warriors who had given everything. The sight of it filled him with a new fire, a fire that burned brighter than the overwhelming odds they faced. They were not going to lose. Not today. The battle raged on, the clash of metal against metal reverberating through the wreckage of the Dauntless. Krell's arms burned with exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. The Shurla were relentless, each machine more terrifying than the last. But now, with the advantage of human tactics and technology, the Rethari soldiers were beginning to fight back with purpose. They had discovered the Shurla's weak points, and they were exploiting them with precision. Krell fired again, his shot landing squarely in the joint of a Shurla's leg. The machine staggered, its towering form momentarily thrown off balance. But it wasn't enough to take it down. The Shurla adjusted, its limbs whirring as it regained its footing and advanced once more. But then, from the corner of his eye, Krell saw something that made his heart skip a beat. The once silent wreckage of the Dauntless had become a battlefield of its own. The energy cannons that Sorvak had activated continued to blast away at the advancing Shurla, but now a larger, more ominous shadow loomed over them. The cold, metallic scent of space filled the air as the Rethari soldiers carefully disembarked from their ship and stepped onto the surface of the shattered asteroid field. Their boots clanged softly against the jagged rocks as they moved forward, their lights flickering across the wreckage that lay scattered like a forgotten graveyard. The sight was surreal. Rubble from both human and unknown craft lay intertwined, burned, and twisted, a testament to a battle long past. Krell adjusted his weapon, his eyes scanning the scene. "This place is a mess," he muttered, still skeptical. "I told you, It's nothing but old junk. Sorvak remained silent, his eyes scanning the wreckage with a level of familiarity that didn't escape Krell's notice. The general's face was stoic, but there was a subtle tension in his posture. He knew something, and Krell could feel it. The team moved deeper into the debris field, carefully navigating through the broken remains of ships and shattered weaponry. As they advanced, they came across the remains of a large, human ship, the Dauntless. Its name was emblazoned on the scorched side, still faintly visible despite the damage. The hull was battered, as if it had been in the heart of a fierce, desperate battle. "Looks like a human warship," one of the soldiers remarked, their voice low with curiosity. "But it's ancient. Why would it still be here?" Sorvak stepped forward, his hand lingering near the scorched hull of the ship. He didn't respond at first, instead kneeling to inspect a nearby fragment of twisted metal. As his fingers brushed against it, something stirred within him. Memories, fragments of a time long past. He didn't speak, but the haunted look in his eyes said enough. He knew this ship. Krell, noticing the change in Sorvak, stepped closer. "What's wrong, General? Do you recognize this wreckage?" Sorvak straightened, his gaze distant, as if lost in thought. He turned slowly to Krell, his voice quiet but firm. "This is no ordinary ship. This is the Dauntless, a human vessel that fought until the end. Its crew did not give up, even when death was certain." Krell raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me this ship fought an entire enemy force by itself? That's insane." Sorvak nodded, but his expression softened, as though the words were difficult to speak. "They fought to the last. To protect others. This was a ship of warriors. And the humans aboard were more than just soldiers. They were legends." Despite himself, Krell's skepticism wavered. He stared at the ship in awe. It was hard to imagine how such a small, fragile species could withstand such a devastating onslaught. And yet, here was the evidence. This ship, this wreckage, was proof of their valor. The thought stirred something inside him, a flicker of respect that he didn't want to acknowledge. As the team moved further into the wreckage, they found the remains of the crew's quarters. Holo recordings flickered to life, projecting images of the crew members as they spoke their final words. One of the recordings showed a young human woman, her face weary but resolute. "We've bought them time," she said, her voice steady, despite the chaos around her. "I know the odds. But as long as one of us stands, the others will make it. That's enough for me." The words sent a chill down Krell's spine. He had heard stories of human bravery, but to see it, to witness their unwavering spirit firsthand, was something else entirely. He couldn't look away as more recordings played, each one showing a different crew member, some laughing, some crying, all of them fighting not for themselves, but for each other. Krell looked around, his mind racing. These humans weren't just legends. They were real. The depth of their courage was something beyond anything he had imagined. And yet, they were gone, sacrificed for a cause that most of his kind had dismissed as meaningless. Sorvak walked past Krell, his steps slow but purposeful. They held the line. Their sacrifice was not in vain. Krell opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He had no reply. The realization was too overwhelming. The Retheri had always prided themselves on their strength, their superiority in battle, and yet here was a species, humans, who fought with something far more powerful: heart. The general's voice broke the silence. "We need to secure the ship's data core. There are answers here. Answers that may explain why this happened." Krell nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. As the soldiers continued to explore the wreckage, Krell found himself lingering near the crew's memorial, a small, unassuming plaque bearing the names of those who had died aboard the Dauntless. One name stood out above the rest: Captain Dale Orc.